Welcome to another edition of the Energy Week podcast. Brad Ray alongside Dr. Energy herself, Ellen Wald. Ellen, how's it going?
It's great. Haven't killed any babies since I announced that on the podcast last week. So I did kill some wasp nests. So hopefully we can all be okay with wasp killing.
Okay. Well, obviously, we got a 5-star review over the week. So 5-star review, one of the best from Seminary Guy. Great show with great insights. Look forward to the show each week. Keep them coming. Thank you for that. And be happy. We would take any 5-star review that you would like to give us in iTunes, or we don't know where else they track them at, but wherever else they track them, you can go ahead and leave one there. Ellen, I got to say, Elon's getting a soft spot in my heart. He is working on it, and he is getting a soft spot in my heart. He's going all in on the protest angle here. Let's just call it what it is. He is talking about selling his houses, calling them tyrants, and now he is talking about moving his factory to Nevada or Texas, or I say moving in the headquarters, which I would assume is the factory as well, to Texas or Nevada. To me, this is an aside. He says in the tweet, frankly, this is the final straw. Tesla will now move its headquarters and future programs to Texas/Nevada immediately. Just to be clear, if we wanted to relocate this podcast immediately, that would just require that one of the three of us are in a different spot and we could record anywhere, anytime. For Tesla to relocate immediately is not something that happens overnight. So this is going to be, if it does happen, a long road to hoe. And by the time the pandemic is probably over, assuming it never ends, this would be something that, a year from now, like, oh, they just finally opened that office in Austin or wherever. So.
But remember, the pandemic might never end in California.
That's true.
Whereas it could be long over in Texas, because, part of the whole pandemic is, I think, the officials' reaction to it. Mm-hmm. So it's a state of being. And so if they declare that the pandemic continues, then it continues there. Whereas, Florida is like all cylinders ahead. It's interesting, though. You still have to call and check, because like chains that are closed nationally are not necessarily open. But interestingly, I think that maybe gives the smaller businesses maybe a leg up in certain things. So, Nordstrom's is closed, but if you want to go to your local, I don't know if there are local clothing brands, but so it's kind of an interesting dichotomy here. Things are opening up here. Elon Musk could move to Florida.
Yeah. Well, I don't know why Florida went on the list. That seemed to make a lot of sense. Go from one beach state to another beach state, makes sense. Coast to coast, whatever. Florida's been pretty open, but the responses have been, depending on where you look for them, but one that stuck out to me was Lorena S. Gonzalez, which is, according to her Twitter bio, a mama, labor leader turned California Assemblywoman, progressive, Latina, Democrat. She's at the Latino Caucus chair, appropriations chair, and she's married to Nathan Fletcher. Her response to Mr. Musk was, do we have the beep button ready, Nate? I don't know if we can.
Yeah.
I don't know if we can actually read this on the podcast. I don't know if the explicit warning would go far enough. She uses a 4-letter word that starts with F and then says Elon Musk. And so, yeah, that's a bold strategy, Cotton. That's a bold,
Elon Musk. That's fighting words.
Yeah, those are fighting words. And so I was like, okay. Now, there has been others. I think the mayor of Palo Alto and some others have come out and said, we want you to stay. But Gavin Newsom is enjoying the power that he currently has over the state. And so it's going to be an interesting battle.
Well, interestingly, so we just got a letter from Richard F. Cortez, county judge of Hidalgo County, Texas, who writes to Mr. Elon Musk of Tesla Motors, Inc. I have recently read of your displeasure with authorities in California and your desire to relocate to Texas, quote, immediately. I wanted to reach out to you to let you know that Hidalgo County, Texas is available to immediately accommodate you and Tesla Motors, et cetera, explains that they have a community of manufacturing facilities called maquiladoras that operate on both sides of the U.S.-Mexican border, which caters to automobile manufacturing operations in Monterrey, Mexico, to a short 2-hour away, and contributes to Mexico now being the 4th largest automotive exporter in the world. So, which, truth be told, it's actually an interesting idea, because I often wondered, why was Elon Musk, why is he trying to be a car manufacturer? The technology is the electric battery and the software and all that stuff. Wouldn't it, maybe it could save him a lot of money if he just goes and, they've already got the automotive manufacturing center set up there. Just say, okay, make these parts or something. I mean, I don't know a whole lot about automotive manufacturing.
Are the subsidies tied to the manufacturing being in the U.S.? I don't know. I'm asking a genuine question.
I don't know. It could be in the U.S. part as opposed to the Mexico part. But my point was, maybe he'd save a lot of money by, latching onto an already existing manufacturing facility as opposed to starting your own freestanding one. I don't know that much about car manufacturing and how hard it is to manufacture X type of car versus Y type of car. But this guy is he's making an interesting point here. How do you think Texans would feel about having a electric vehicle manufacturer in the state?
Well, I would say if he's going to go anywhere, it's probably Austin, because that's kind of the more progressive part of Texas. Houston obviously has a lot of electric green companies, despite the oil and gas brand. But Austin is kind of probably be pretty welcoming to that, and has, I would imagine, I don't know what kind of workers they're looking for. That's a question when you talk about factory. Is do you have do you need a lot of laborers, or do you need some kind of engineers or whatever? So that would be kind of way in. I think it's interesting. Texas has found itself in an interesting spot, which is they have brought in a lot of businesses, especially from California, and yet it's changed the voting demographics, which is what brought them here to begin with. And it's hey, what brought you guys here? You probably don't want to change that. I mean, you've left that way.
Yeah.
You've exactly. Left those bad ideas. Leave the bad ideas behind you. Don't bring them with you. That's the thing. But it's an interesting deal, because you have maybe the elite, if you will, the business owners, the CEOs who look at this, go, okay, I can make more money in Texas, but the working class might not view it that way. And they go to Texas, well, I'm still going to vote the same way I am. There's no, and so it creates a interesting situation for sure. I'm not entirely sure he's actually going to move. Do you think he's going to move?
No, I don't think he's going to move. I think I think this is his way of seeing what's out there. Remember when Amazon was join the competition for the next, the new Amazon headquarters, and everyone was spending all of this time and money to put together their packages to show, or was it Google, or it was Google?
Amazon did it too, as well.
And then in the end, they decided, they're like, we're just going to move to New York and right outside of DC.
Right.
And it was I think. So, I wonder if this is kind of give me your best offer, guys, just because I want to see what's out there, but it doesn't mean we're actually moving.
Yeah. And the one thing I will say is I do respect Musk, because this is a political thing that's not it's a very charged issue. And so even folks in his company and his workers are probably not all behind him. Some probably, so it's cost him a lot of personal capital here to take this issue. If you go back to when he said this on Twitter, the folks that were just probably diehard Elon Musk fans 3 days ago were absolutely crushing him for this position. And so he does actually have a voice for those people who are literally suffering because they can't work. And so I do applaud him for at least bringing awareness to that issue on with the type of platform and following he has. So I've been critical of him in the past, but here I think he is dead on. And so I want to support him. And he even said, I don't know, we don't think we have this in the article today, but he said that, there's not necessarily that they're wanting to force workers to come back. They want to give them the option to come back. And so, and so that's the thing. And Ellen, let me just, as an aside, one of the things I wondered about with the potential meat shortages we've talked about, are you aware of how those jobs are? Are those jobs where in the meat manufacturing business, something that, the locals, if, Bob can't work because he's a non-essential business, is that something that you can just call up Bob and, have him go work, or are there union issues at play? And, obviously there's some safety stuff and some kind of training, but any idea or insight on how long it takes to kind of get that workforce up and going? Because you might have folks who are actually getting the coronavirus and they can't go to work, but Bob's like, hey, I would go to work. Is that a viable option, or any insight on that? I know it's kind of a random thing, but I've been kind of chewing on it as I've seen the shutdowns.
So it's a good question. I actually read a book from a while ago about the the meat manufacturing that went on in Postville, Iowa. But this was a book from a while ago, I think that from the 1990s. And I don't know if meat packing and meat, manufacturing still operates the same way. I know that at least there are some meat packing manufacturers that utilize a lot of illegal immigrant labor, in which case unions wouldn't be an issue, and you can, basically say I'm going to fire you. I don't know to what extent that's still the case. I'm saying, this is based on information that's fairly dated. Right. I think I'm pretty sure it's very cold. They do it in the cold, and there does need to be some skill in there. But my guess is that, you could definitely find people that you could train. I mean, I don't think it's a really big training, long training. I think there's also a difference between the people who are actually doing the butchering. That requires some skill. Right. And then people who are doing other parts of the process. I honestly don't know that much. It's an interesting thing to think about. Is it the kind of thing that do you have to shut down the whole plant? Can you institute safety measures? Can you draw on other people? There may be people who would be yeah, I definitely want to do this. And there may be people I'm not going near this thing because
exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm not necessarily in favor of Trump making the people go to work, but I have wondered, is it something where 30% of the jobs or 50% of the jobs, if locals who had never worked at Tyson or whatever wanted to go, they understand the risk, but they needed a paycheck, if they could go step in for at least a short amount of time to kind of keep things running, and if they wanted to. So anyways, I just I've been thinking about that. I hadn't heard anybody really discuss it. So
I think it's good to admit when, you don't have the expertise to really make that call.
No whatsoever. Yeah. You're Dr. Energy, not Dr. Chicken. So I just figured, but I thought I'd ask. So not saying you are a chicken. I know. I think
though, sometimes that's one of the industries where if I learned more about it, I'd probably never be able to eat meat again.
Yeah. It's a catch-22 there. So I saw over the weekend, maybe it's Thursday or Friday, on Twitter, folks announcing that the Saudis had won the oil war.
What oil war?
Well, whatever you want to call it. Yeah, whatever you want to call this thing that happened. The price war, the oil war, the fixed price war. They had won. They've won. They have won. And then this morning,
I do know what you're talking about. Yeah, I was perplexed by that announcement as well. They're definitely, I was wondering if there was some sort of PR push actually behind that, considering it all kind of came out at once.
Right. But if you follow maybe before Friday, the sovereign wealth funds of Russia and Saudi, you might walk away with a different impression of what has actually happened there. And then news broke this morning about the Saudis tripling the taxes on their citizens. And so let's kind of get into what's going on in Saudi Arabia. But it feels like there was a lot of hoopla about they'd won, and I'm not listening. Not wishing ill on anybody. It's just I think it's ultimately too early to tell who's going to be the quote unquote winner or loser, but there's definitely troubling signs in Russia and the Saudis about what the impact on this is. And we said on Texas Oil and Gas Podcast this morning, we're talking about some, I don't think either of those countries expected the global economy to drop 26% in oil demand over the next 2 months. So when they made the decision, they may expect a slight drop, but not what we saw. But that's the hand they played. And now you're seeing significant damage to their economies.
Oh yeah. And so, and I think it'll be interesting to watch how these two economies react, because remember, Russia can devalue its currency, but Saudi Arabia, the rial is pegged to the dollar. So short of like deep unpegging it, which would basically cause disastrous inflation, plus it would create a lot of issues for the oil trade. I mean, it's not just that they can't do it because suddenly like it would cause massive inflation in the country, but Aramco does all of its business in dollars, but it has to pay its dividend in reals. So like you're going to run into like huge issues in terms of the oil trade there. And I know people are like, oh, but they can start selling their oil in yuan and in rubles and in God knows what else. Like, come on, guys, they're not going to do that. Like they do everything in dollars. They do everything in English. Like they're not going to suddenly decide to like sell oil to China and accept yuans for it. They're not going to, there's nothing they can do with that. So I really don't see, Saudi Arabia doesn't really have the option, I think, to unpeg its currency from the dollar. So I thought it was really interesting to see the changes that they've made. First, because some of them were things that I recommended in my Bloomberg piece that got skewered because I recommended that they fire their oil minister. Now, I haven't done that yet, but the other things, if anyone managed to read beyond, the first line, were basically to cut more oil than they pledged to and signal the market for exactly when these cuts are going to happen so that the market understands what to expect from Saudi Arabia, what they can expect basically over the entire year from Saudi oil production. Because one of the things that really jarred the market and I think made the market lose confidence in Saudi Arabia as a force for stabilization in prices was what happened on March 9th when, they basically ignored Russia's signaling of we don't want to cut, and we certainly don't want to cut that much, pushed for a huge cut. Russia walked away and Saudi Arabia reacted to that by saying, we're going to overproduce to our max, and then went through with it. Even after it was clear, I mean, it wasn't clear on March 9th that demand was going to fall out of the market, but it was clear a week or two later, right? Like the ban on travel to the U.S. ban travel to and from Europe, like March 12th, I think. Or shortly after that, and then you got the lockdown started. So by the end of March, before they even started producing, we already had a sense that demand was shocked. I mean, there was this huge demand shock. So, and yet they continue to carry through with this policy. So I think that reaction and that kind of about face really jarred the market. So it would be helpful if Saudi Arabia wants to regain its position as a stable leadership force in the market to signal what's going to happen. And now they're signaling, hey, in June, we're going to cut another 1 million barrels on top of what we pledged. So that was one of the things I recommended. The other thing was budget austerity, like to introduce austerity measures and be clear about what they are. And they're starting to be more clear about what these austerity measures are. But then on top of that, now let's talk about the VAT. So Saudi Arabia never had taxes, really. I mean, they had taxes on Aramco and on some other businesses, but they didn't really have taxes. Then recently they instituted a 5% VAT. And, we can debate, what kind of taxes VATs are. I mean, that's why things are expensive in Europe. It's basically a tax on any transaction, essentially, or any purchase of anything. And when they did that, though, at the same time, they created a, quote, citizen account, where basically a way for them to like give money to poor people. Anyone under a certain income or whatnot got money through the citizen account. But then they also took all government employees, people who drew government salary, which is a lot. I think something like 70% of the employed people who are employed in Saudi Arabia, 70% of them actually work for the government.
Right.
So they all got some sort of like cost of living, like sum of money. They were given a sum of money to like help with cost of living. So now Saudi Arabia is taking away that cost of living bonus or whatever they were calling it, and they're tripling their VAT. So if you were paying 5% before, now you're paying 15%. So, that's a huge thing to do in a country that has not taxed people. So you're basically in a huge recession, and Saudi Arabia generally goes into recession whenever the government isn't pumping money into, isn't building, isn't doing stuff. And a lot of the Saudi economy is also dependent on government construction. Mm-hmm. So the Saudi economy, they already had high unemployment to start with. Now you're going into a place where oil prices are way, way, way down. you're cutting government spending, and you're now taxing the people more, and you're doing it in a way that taxes every transaction. So every time they buy something, they got to now pay, a VAT that's 3 times as much. And I mean, it's like, isn't that going to kill consumption?
Mm-hmm. I'm not entirely sure what the long play is. And one of the things this piece in Reuters points out, it says that this is the last line of the piece. It says, but fast forward 12 to 18 months and Saudi Arabia will have a bigger market share while oil majors and shale will be severely hit. And again, I think depends on what you mean by shale, because as we talked about before, you could have it where there's fewer shale producers but have a larger strength in the market because of just the way it works. They just have more acreage and can respond a lot differently. But yeah, it feels like everyone wants to declare the winner here, but
we could also have a talk about market share. I'm sorry, because maybe I'm just not understanding this term market share. But okay, when I think about market share, I think about so say you've got like Rice Krispies and Cheerios and Corn Flakes, okay, and they're all vying for the market share of the breakfast cereal eaters. Right. Okay, I don't really eat breakfast cereal, so I'm not part of that entire pie. But for all the people who eat breakfast cereal, now you've got your people who like Rice Krispies and you people who like Cheerios and people who like Corn Flakes. So some of those are brand loyal, right?
Right.
So, they're brand loyal. So, but say Cheerios is like, my Cheerios are healthier. Come eat mine. Or they cut the price on Cheerios. So you get some of the Rice Krispies people to switch to Cheerios. But are they really capturing the market share, or are they just buying what happens to be cheaper because it's on sale for the month? And then next month they're going to go back to eating their Rice Krispies because it's the normal price. So this is what I'm not sure. Like, just because Saudi Arabia produced way more oil in April, and it cut its prices. So of course it was going to sell more, but does that really mean that they captured the market share? Like, now that they're raising their prices to Asia, are we going to see the people who bought from them in April just go back to whoever they were buying from before? Or they're going to be like, I don't need that Saudi oil. Now it's too expensive. Is that really winning the market share battle? Like, is there really such a thing, unless you have a long-term contract, is there really such a thing as capturing market share when, anyone can just substitute any other similar blend of oil? Maybe I'm missing something, because everyone loves to talk about market share, and I just don't see how it really applies.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something there for sure, because the first thing, now, I don't think this necessarily applies necessarily in the larger global oil market. But if you just think about, how we do business as individuals, if you want to go buy a cereal, as you mentioned, just use that analogy, you're more likely, if you've never bought cereal before, to go buy one from a commercial that you've seen, rather than buying the Great Value brand. Unless you're just a consistent Great Value buyer and you like Great Value products, and you're okay that you're probably going to buy the Honey Nut Cheerios or the Raisin Bran or whatever, a name brand, because you feel like you can trust them. If you're going to go buy something online, you're going to go see if it's on Amazon, because Amazon delivers. So in the geopolitical space, that kind of would go to country stability and the ability to deliver products consistently. So like Iran, you probably don't want to put a bunch of your oil buying on Iran because you don't know what's going to happen there. Or Venezuela, you don't want your country to be dependent on buying from Venezuela too much because you're not sure what's going to happen there, right? So, but the Saudis are politically stable for the most part, as far as their ability to get the product to market. So I don't really think that would be the issue. The thing that could hurt them, though, is if they had political instability, where their potential to deliver was questioned, or the U.S. had political instability. I think that would be the way that you could see market share shifting, or if Russia became really aggressive and they started trying to go to war with people, then you might see people not buying from them because the price doesn't matter, because they're more mad. That would seem, I think, to be where you would potentially see market share shift. But as to your other point, I think the price is going to be a larger driver, unless there are other economic factors or military factors or whatever that's being weighed. But yeah, I think that's your point is spot on, is that price is going to be the determining factor if everything else is equal. Yeah. And other thing is, if you're on a low sugar diet, you're not going to buy the Frosted Flakes. You're going to buy the plain old Jane Cheerios. So what blends of oil does each country have, and what can they give as well?
Right. And Saudi Arabia does have one advantage, which is that it offers it has blends of like all the different types of blend. You can get extra light Arab, you can get sour, you can get whatever. So I see that's a benefit in terms of like capturing market share. I just don't think that you can declare that they've won the market share battle because in April they sold a lot of oil. I think that if you look at if we look at May and also we look at June, it's going to look much different. Plus you've got, look, and the point you were making about shale, it's like, well, what shale? So you've got Parsley and Diamondback coming out and saying, hey, if WTI hits 30, we're going to produce more, which means they're going to sell more, possibly, exporting it as well. Whereas you've got Chesapeake saying we're shutting down 70% of our drilling and declaring bankruptcy. Right. So it's not a monolith.
Right. Exactly. No, I couldn't agree more. I am, but the other thing I would say back to the political instability. I'm not saying that the Saudi Arabia, the kingdom of Saudi Arabia is going to implode, but if their economic woes do get bad and they cannot employ 70% of the population, they are severely dependent on having a profitable oil business. And so if you do see long-term low prices, you could see political instability there that could disrupt the supply chain.
Oh, absolutely. This is the big thing that I think you cannot ignore. This is a huge change. So like Saudi Arabia, their social contract was basically like the king is the sovereign and the king gets to own this oil business and profits off of it. And he provides for his subjects. So that's like the basic social contract. When you introduce taxes into that, you're changing the social contract because now the people are the ones who are providing the coffers for the king. What does it mean to increase the VAT? That means the monarchy wants to get more money. Like, I think it says a lot. It says that, first of all, they're scared about Aramco's Q2. Aramco's going to release its Q1 financials on Tuesday morning. So when this podcast is out, we'll have known, but we don't know yet because like we said last week, we tape a little early. So we don't know, but I think that all of these things that Saudi Arabia has announced indicate that it's not good. And remember, Q1 financials, only like 3 out of the 13 weeks of those financials were after oil prices tanked. So imagine what Q2 is going to look like.
Right. And let me just make one other point on this, and you might can add some color to it because you know the Saudi kingdom far better than I do. I met some folks years ago that worked for Aramco, and we talked about eminent domain and relocation and stuff like that. And basically, how they explained it to me. So I'm just taking their words and trying to repeat it best I can. They said that, if they come to a village or a city or whatever you call it, and there's, people there and they discover oil and they decide that they want to drill there, that basically the king will take and remove the people somewhere else. Okay. Now, when you add in a tax and you've bought a bunch of stuff, you just put your fence up, you redid the roof, you just got some new furniture, you put in a patio, and you paid 15% tax on all of that, the kingdom now has to reissue that money back, or there will be substantial frustration because moving is not fun. But okay, you're moving and I get the money and whatever, I can kind of deal with that. But now if I lose 15%, because I've had to pay a tax, there are ways that the tax could cause civil unrest that we as Americans may not think of. But that's the kind of thing that could creep in if you're kind of struggling already, like, whoa, I'm taxing and now I've got to move or something like that could actually.
You're not just onto something. This is already happening. These kinds of things. So, but we're talking about with NEOM. Okay. So he's like, oh, he's taking this big part of the eastern of the of the Red Sea coast that's uninhabited and building some giant city. Guess what? It's not uninhabited. There are people who already live there. And the Wall Street Journal has actually done a lot of really good reporting on this issue of the people who are actually living there who are facing relocation. And they're all like members of a certain tribe, and they have a tribal identity as well. So that's something that they're up against as well. But there was recently this issue. So there was a guy who was basically like, I'm not moving. And apparently at the end of April, security forces shot and killed a man who had mounted I'm reading directly from this article, I'll put in the show notes, an online campaign critical of the government, and vowed in online videos to resist eviction from his home in this town. And so they, he said, quote, "This is my home and I will protect it. I would not be surprised if they come and kill me now." And then he was killed in exchange of gunfire. And, I'm sure there are all sorts of little specifics, but the point is that, this wasn't even for oil. I mean, for oil, you could be like, yeah, they want to make money. This is a guy who's like, I'm not moving for your like city of flying cars or whatever. Then on top of that, you add in once you throw in a tax, you really you start. I mean, think about how taxes, like the American Revolution was in large part fought over taxes.
3% or something like that, 1%. It was really low.
This so like you can't. I mean, and it wasn't just fought over taxes. I mean, you're historian hat now. There was a larger issue that going back to the French-Indian War, where Americans basically felt like they had fought for Britain in this war, and now years later, they're being asked to both, they gave their lives for this war and they were being asked to pay for it, which is what those taxes were. So on top of, so that was part of the way that they kind of broke. They felt like they were not being treated as citizens or subjects of the British Empire. They were being treated differently. And so that led to this larger kind of ideological split. But yeah, taxes precipitated this shift in thinking about how people relate to a sovereign and a government. So it's interesting to see. I think there are a lot of issues in Saudi society that tend to prevent this kind of development and thinking from happening. You see these issues and you're like, this is it. This is the big break. And it never is, because there are a lot of kind of ingrained, social issues. Saudi Arabia has never had big civil society. It's just, but taxes and money really get to people. And so in my mind, this is a huge and important shift. And I understand, pardon me, like I get it. The government is really suffering because their two biggest sources of income, oil and Hajj and Umrah, are basically out. Mm-hmm. Like they're the oil is, but in a sense, of course, they did this to themselves. Oil prices would have been higher had they not overproduced in April, because they didn't have to shock that market on top of they didn't have to shock the supply on top of shocking the demand. So they could have pulled back the supply shock, and I don't think it would have been as bad.
Yeah. And one final comment on this, get your take on it. One of the things that when you look at governments that like to exercise a lot of power, whether you're talking about North Korea, China, or wherever, even to our good friend Gavin Newsom, they all have a sense in which how far they can push things and how the give and take works. And so while this news about the VAT is interesting, I did see that they released, I guess it was within the last couple of weeks, that they have decided not to give minors the death penalty anymore.
And they decided not to use in Saudi Arabia. They recently decided not to use flogging as a punishment.
Okay, so the article I read said they hadn't decided about the flogging yet. So the flogging, okay, I wasn't sure about that. So no, you probably got a newer update. But my point is that and when you look at this, I don't think you can separate those two issues as going, hey, we're going to tax 15%. Oh, by the way, we're rolling back the death penalty for minors, because they have they understand that to keep a people, to let you rule, you have to keep the middle class happy. You have to keep them happy. And so it's going to be interesting to see how what things change over in Saudi Arabia if if their economy kind of struggles, because they will have to loosen up some of those regulations, or they will find people that are quite unhappy with being burdened everywhere they turn.
Yeah, exactly. I also wonder if there's an opportunity for the UAE and Bahrain and the surrounding Gulf countries to take advantage of this because, they also, I believe, have a VAT, but, they've been concerned about losing out on like entertainment markets and stuff to Saudi Arabia, because as Saudi Arabia opened movie theaters and concerts, people that were going to the UAE for these kinds of entertainment opportunities, they were losing out. I wonder if in raising the VAT in Saudi Arabia, there's a way for them to maybe take advantage of this, maybe lower their VAT and kind of draw some of the consumption that they were concerned about losing back to those areas. But, we'll have to see. I mean, it's like there's no travel going on now, but, soon.
Right. Okay. One quick story before we get to Dr. Dean Foreman with the API. Let's talk about oil storage from the Wall Street Journal. The EIA numbers came out and indicate that maybe the storage wasn't nearly going to be as full as we had been led to believe. I think they were down 10% from what the projections were. I was kind of caught off guard by that. I was thinking, okay, here we go. I think 70 to 80% were what the reports were going to be, and it came in like 61%, I think. Now I've seen some folks dispute that number. Folks agree with that number. I'm not sure, but it does feel like the sentiment maybe is starting to shift, that maybe the storage issue isn't going to be bad. And one of the things I pointed out is the CEO of Enterprise Products came out and said that he didn't think that we were going to fill the storage as well. But there's a lot of folks trying to make money on the storage business right now, regardless. Despite Commissioner Craddock's statement last week, even in the great state of Texas. Not trying to compete with Cushing, but they are doing stuff.
So one of the things that I was kind of wondering about is how difficult is it to build storage? Because I know that I've talked to our friends at Tinker Trackers, and he's like, yeah, you can see him building it on a satellite photo. But I get that in the United States there are more regulations, so on and so forth. Although I like this picture in the Wall Street Journal article. It says a well water solutions and rental pool in West Texas, and you know what it looks like? It looks like an above ground swimming pool.
A very large one, but yes, the biggest one you've ever seen. But yes, it does exactly what it looks like.
So, so I kind of wonder, is there an opportunity here to really put up more storage, or is this the kind of thing that like you really have to put in a lot of capital or enough capital that it's not going to be worth it because, it's not going to be worth it in the long run?
Yeah. So I can take.
Did you see that? Oh, I didn't even look at these pictures the first time. Ready containments oil storage bladders.
Yeah.
They're calling them bladders.
Yep. $65,000, you can get you one.
Oh God.
Yeah. So I know a group that is, I haven't talked to them the past few days about the project, but they were looking to get into the oil storage business that they weren't in it before. They're trying to get into it, got some investors and all that jazz. And they were going to be able to take 500,000 barrels by mid-May, if everything went according to plan, and 4.5 million barrels by mid-July. So that was what their target was. And again, this is not, Energy Transfer Enterprise or something like that. This is a private group that was going to put this together. That was their goal. There's a lot of risk involved, though, because you have to buy the oil, they have to store the oil, and they have to sell the oil and contracts. And it's a definitely a risky proposition. I think and I don't know if it's on the show or not, but when oil was going negative 30, I got like 3 or 4 phone calls in one day saying, hey, we think about getting storage business. What do you think? And I was like, every time I'd say, well, you're not the first, the first person to call me was like, well, okay, you're the first one to call me, but if you're thinking about it, everyone who's got the money and infrastructure is already thinking about it. And then it kind of went to the second person. Well, you're the second person to call me, third person, you're the third person, the fourth person, you're the fourth person to call me. So it feels like it's one of those deals where some people will get in. We'll read the stories in 6 months. This group made $1 billion off of oil storage, but right now I don't know if there's really going to be that demand. But the final thing I say is, it sounds like if it depends on the positioning of some of these companies that might be desperate because they did not have contracts for storage, that you could find some opportunity there. But yeah, so 4.5 million barrels within 90 days or 60 days, whatever it was, is the most I'm not the most, but what I'm personally aware of someone projecting.
Would you get into the oil storage bladder business?
I had a couple groups that asked me if I wanted to participate, and I passed mainly because not a bladder, but just on storage in general. Mainly because I'm not aware of what the legal liabilities are if the oil leaks. Right? And so if you're going to fill up storage and it starts leaking out, there's going to be all kinds of hell to pay. And so I said, I'm not sure what all the liability is here. So I'm going to sit on the sidelines and hope you fellas make all the money, but I will sit this one out. And I've made some connections with folks, but yeah, I'm not sure.
Photos are fantastic. Like these photos are like hilarious.
They're great. So, okay, Ellen, let's get to Dr. Dean Foreman, who joins us now with his monthly statistical report. And up next on his monthly visit to Energy Week is Dr. Dean Foreman with the American Petroleum Institute. Dr. Foreman, how's it going today?
Hey, Ryan. Hey, Ellen. Great. Thanks for having me.
I know we are on a short time period, so we will make quick mention that you are in between a meeting with the Oklahoma Energy Producers Alliance, and so we have a copy of your testimony. I believe we can put that on the show notes. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll put that in the show notes, and listeners can go check that out. We won't spend a whole lot of time on that, maybe at the end if we can get to it. But let's talk about the monthly statistical report. Let's see here. Let's start with one. As U.S. oil-directed drilling fell by a record 52% over the last 2 months. 52%, Dr. Foreman. There's been a lot of talk about, is the market responding or not? It seems like the market has responded and is continuing to respond. And we're seeing, less drilling rigs, less drilling, and eventually we're going to see a substantial decline in production.
You've hit it exactly right. In fact, based on EIA estimates, that substantial decline has already begun. The drilling's been cut in half in less than 2 months here. And, last Monday we had the decision rendered by the Texas Railroad Commission not to prorate. And the deciding factor that Commissioner Sitton said in his TV interview, the deciding factor is really that the market's been working. And, API, we've been one of the ones helping contribute primary data showing that the market's working. So we're seeing it. And the hearing that's on break with the Oklahoma Corporation Commission right this second is a very similar proration hearing where the Oklahoma Energy Producers Alliance has requested to have proration in the state. And, the market is having to shut in, especially locally around Cushing, where storage conditions have reached tank top. And people are forgetting that this is largely a demand side problem, not a supply side problem, but everybody's trying to turn the dial and gain some, at least marginal advantage on the supply side to try and make it through these hard times. So it really is, the system as a whole is working really well, but it has these local points of dislocation that have been really painful for the industry. I
know I made jokes about the 5-year moving average, 5-year range on the charts before, but now we are out of the 5-year range on a lot of the charts. So encourage the listeners to go look at that because we won't be able to get to them all. I want to talk quickly about gasoline demand. I saw a report from Reuters saying that I believe they're starting to see an uptick in gasoline demand. It's still about, I think, 50% below what it is normally. And Ellen and I talked, I think, last week about China. You start to see car sales in China are going up. Is gasoline demand most likely the fastest thing that could return to normalcy, whereas jet fuel and stuff like that might take a little longer?
I think jet fuel is likely to lag, but gasoline and diesel both. And, diesel, though it is down 20+% year on year, it's held up relatively well each month as people have had to order more goods delivered, a lot of freight transportation to get stuff home. If you were doing it in order, jet fuel on a percentage basis is down by far the most right now. We saw, as we've had these podcast discussions each month, some fuel substitution where, like in February and early March, people were driving more because they weren't flying. And then by late March, when we started having to stay-at-home orders, people started not driving as much and but ordering a lot more stuff from home. So jet fuel's down the most, then gasoline, then diesel. And we would expect it to kind of reverse its course as we start ramping back up. And now we've got some 31 states that are gradually starting to reopen. And in the last 2 weeks, by the way, we've seen demand on net go up 1.3 million barrels per day. So it is a big move. And now more states are opening. So the hope, based on just a couple of data points, the hope is that the worst is past us.
One of the interesting things that I saw a report recently, I think from Gas Buddy, they're going to release something that I guess they did a survey of, are people planning to take driving trips this summer? Because that was one of the other issues I was kind of wondering, well, if people aren't going to be flying for summer vacation, they might choose to drive more now. On the other hand, you have people who are scared and staying at home and not driving. So what are some of the outlooks in terms of gasoline demand for the summer, which is typically a very, very a period of much higher gasoline demand?
Well, I mean, as API, we don't project it out, but I think I would share your sentiment that there'd be some expectation of pent-up demand where people have been stuck at home, and they really do want to take summer vacation if they can, but they're going to do it probably locally, visiting family, going somewhere where they can do it in sort of a safe way, as opposed to taking that big international trip or doing something that probably requires being around masses of people, right? So we'll see how it plays out. But yeah, I mean, at least directionally it should go. And, the industries, there's going to be an enduring effect here, right? Industries that are tourism or resort-based or based on convening large crowds of people are going to continue to be under pressure until we have either high degree of herd immunity or a vaccine that's available here. In the meantime, other things, a shift towards e-commerce has definitely been accelerated here, and we're seeing that play out in our freight and diesel data. That said, the economic indicator that we base on diesel as API really dropped like a rock, just like all the other indicators this month, so not a surprise. But, there's not a lot of the monthly statistical report compared to like looking at week by week data. Right now we're sitting there pinning our hopes and dreams on the week-to-week changes and trying to see when it's shallowed out, understanding that people kind of expected April to be the worst point. So when you take April as a whole, as an average, and look at the monthly statistical report, it's a little bit now in the hindview mirror. And it shouldn't be surprising that the data are horrible. I mean, it really shows pervasive weakness across the board.
One more question about gasoline, not just demand in the United States. I mean, we know that the United States is a huge driver of gasoline demand, but the United States also exports a lot of gasoline to other parts of the world. How are U.S. gasoline and diesel and other product exports doing, in this new situation?
That's a fantastic question, because they did go down, but they didn't go down nearly as much as even I might have thought. And, it's sort of remarkable that the thing that really did drop like a rock were the crude oil imports. So those went down as refineries were turning down the utilization to a record low, actually, of about 70% for the month of April. We saw 1.6, 1.8 million barrel per day drop, a big drop in the amount of crude oil that was imported. And technically that should whipsaw the U.S. back to being a net oil exporter for the month.
One more question about gasoline. So we are getting into the summer, which is when people start to switch over to summer blend gasoline. Is there any sense that maybe these regulations might be suspended in order to allow for the use of the extra, is there extra winter blend gasoline in storage because people didn't use it in March? I mean, how are we going to deal with this kind of the switchover and potential imbalance?
And again, fantastic question, and more inside baseball for those that follow the different fuel specs right across states and how fungible the fuel is across seasons. The ability we have been working actively with our state API regulatory representatives, who in turn have been working with the member companies and the state governments where necessary to secure the waivers needed to continue to store and maybe use that fuel later on. That flexibility has been needed because we've seen storage now of not just gasoline, but all the refined products being about a third higher than usual in terms of days of supply. So normally you'd have 25 or 30 days supply, and now you're 35, 40 days of supply of each of those products.
Let's talk about refineries for a second. We kind of hit on it, and it says that refinery throughput and capacity utilization had their largest decline on record since 1985. That was the year I was born, for perspective. So that's been almost 35. July will make 35 years. That's a long time, especially for some kind of statistic like this. Put that in perspective for us, because you could read that and sometimes you go, "Oh my gracious, is that as bad as I sound it is?" Or is it just? Kind of frame that up to help us understand what that actually means.
Well, anytime these mega projects, multi-billion-dollar investments, they're meant to run kind of flat out. You want to run them at 80, 90% or more utilization to be efficient. And if you start turning them down to run only half speed, some stuff that's designed to run as a kind of fluid process can clog up. And if they clog up, then it's a very expensive process to basically clean it out and safely make it so that you can start the operations. So here, to drop almost suddenly, to go from 85 to 90% utilization all the way down to 70.1 for April means refiners, one, are very cognizant of the demand conditions and storage conditions, and they're responding to it. That's what you'd expect rationally. But they're turning it down about as low as they safely feel and economically feel they can do to keep it all together through this downturn. So it is... now, the 1985 point wasn't a global pandemic. It wasn't as big of a demand shock. It was actually more of a labor shock, actually, for the industry at that point. It was a completely different cause. But to go down, you just don't see U.S. refineries going down that low. Internationally, in China and South Korea, you have other refinery operations globally that haven't tended to run as efficiently, as productively, or high utilization rates that we typically have seen in the United States. The U.S. has led the world consistently in terms of its efficiency and energy efficiency in refining. So this is a big deal to scale back this much and do it suddenly. And, we hope that we need this industry as we have an economic recovery and a demand recovery. We need the U.S. industry to be able to ramp back up quickly. So the hope is there that the industry is resilient and able to respond.
Looking at the import and export, it looks like both dropped. If I'm doing the math right, the imports dropped by 3 times as much as the exports did. Can you kind of walk us through what's going on with that?
Well, that is just purely the economics of the U.S. because of the crackers and cokers that we have. When we track refinery throughput and say how it's changed, the thing that's the high frequency thing that we track is crude distillation units or simple refining. There's another 6 million barrels per day, roughly, of thermal cracking and catalytic cracking and coking capabilities. So, that largely requires importing some heavier crudes and some medium crudes to process through those. And as those units got turned down big time in April, you saw a lot of the imports that would feed them get turned down as well. So it is a lumpy process to have those things turned off. And then on the global side, we've seen it under pressure, but it's been more of a matter of degree than difference, where we've just seen a drop in the amount of exports, but it's competing internationally with that.
One quick follow-up on the refinery. Is there any concern, let's just say demand surges back, the next month or two, is there any concern about the refineries getting back open with shutdown periods or things like that? Any kind of adjusting in schedule that we might go, we kind of had a big drop-off here, but to pick back up might not be as easy, or can they just kind of get things going back to normal as soon as the demand is there?
I would think the refineries have been careful in the way that they've done this, that they're shutting down with good operations integrity and safety and making sure that they're doing it as best they can. Now, on the upstream resource development side, where you shut in a well, especially on the unconventional side, you have some uncertainty about what you're going to get when you open it back up. And the best example is if you have a 2-mile long horizontal lateral wellbore, and there's some variation in ups and downs or porpoising in that wellbore over time, or over the distance. If liquids accumulate as you shut in, and you'd expect they would, you may or may not be able to produce all 2 miles of it when you open it back up. So that's the kind of concern, that there could be a permanent productivity loss with some of those wells, and many of the producers in Texas and Oklahoma have expressed that concern.
Ellen?
Oh, sorry.
I have another one, but if you go ahead.
You go ahead.
So one of the things that I've been curious about was, if you look at the natural gas production that comes out of the Permian, it accounts for a substantial amount. But as the production begins to fall, have we seen any indicators of what's going to happen with the natural gas market? Will we see maybe the Haynesville or something like that? I know you don't make predictions, but is there any indicator of what we might see with natural gas prices? We kind of joked on the podcast a week or two ago that natural gas prices actually eclipsed WTI for a little while by a substantial margin. I mean, it was negative 37 WTI. So, natural gas was whooping it for a little bit. But is there any indicators that you guys seen about what we can expect with natural gas production or what we've seen so far?
I mean, that negative price is such an anomaly. It's very localized to those conditions around Cushing. But on the gas side, you've seen it show up in the prices of gas-intensive exploration production companies this last month or so, is that as the anticipated boost of natural gas coming from associated gas production with oil it is expected to drop here, the overall gas industry has seen a little bit of buoyancy as a result of that. Now, the prices are still relatively low. I mean, we've still been sitting $1.70, $1.80 per million BTU. It's not like these are high natural gas prices, but the storage conditions aren't exceptional, and it does suggest that despite having had a relatively warm winter, gas is in better position than it was looking a few months ago.
Well, let's not discount too much. Natural gas got a small victory. Rig count in the Barnett is up 100%. It went from 1 rig to 2. So we are celebrating our boom of rigs over here. I know we're getting close up against the time. Can you give us a quick overview of what's going on in Oklahoma and what you're doing there today?
So Oklahoma has a proration hearing there. The Oklahoma Energy Producers Alliance has petitioned to have proration, much as Parsley and Pioneer in Texas have petitioned. So this would be where the government would step in and mandate production quotas, basically, to, in a proportionate way, decrease the amount that everybody's allowed to produce, usually by well, not just by operator. So it's quite an administrative burden, and it tends to penalize the most efficient wells, basins, and producers if you do it that way, as opposed to each company looking at their own shut-in economics and figuring out, okay, the price, the cash I'm out of pocket to produce, it either covers my cash cost this month or it doesn't. And a lot of producers have, on a market basis, not only made the decision to shut in, but the Oklahoma Corporation Commission issued an order, an emergency one last week, saying, you have the ability as a producer to shut it if you need to shut in. And that they don't have to go and ask the permission at that point. And that's another thing that was being debated today. But the idea of government intervention to mandate how those shut-ins might occur when the market is responding in force is it goes back fundamentally to the business model in this industry. And unfortunately, it's pitting small producers against larger ones, the ones that have pipeline egress and the ability to get to other storage markets, other customer markets, and to be able to move and have assured proven product placement. The business model in stressed times requires more redundancy and more resilience across that risk management spectrum, and that's what we're seeing really get tested.
Okay, Dr. Foreman, I know we're up against the clock here. Any final things that we missed that you wanted to point out to listeners if they go this report? Is it out yet, or does it come out this Thursday?
It's coming out Thursday.
Anything that they need to go look for that we didn't get a chance to cover today?
Well, these leading economic indicators, that I will leave you with one silver lining, is that these economic indicators right now, all of them are going off a really low point, right? They're factoring in the worst point that everybody expected, which was April. And the weekly data have shown a little bit of a U-turn of the latter half of April and early May. That's a bright sign. And the economic expectations, with some $8 trillion worth of stimulus being pumped into the global economy, when you now look at the Bloomberg consensus, they're expecting a pretty big uplift come 2021. And EIA's expectations for how the oil market will rebalance, there's a lot of action happening expected by EIA in Q3, where the amount of surplus globally is expected to be minimal at that point. And they're actually showing the market globally going short by Q4. So watch this space. These things can change. There's a lot of uncertainty, but we're looking at a lot of change by EIA expectations sooner than later. And frankly, $8 trillion can't be wrong. We're going to see some response to that.
Okay, Dr. Foreman, we appreciate you hopping on. We, for the listeners' benefit, we had to kind of squeeze this in here because you're on a 20-minute break for your Oklahoma testimony. So appreciate you working with us and getting this done. We know you're busy, and awesome. Look forward to have you back next month and maybe a quarterly. No, we got a little bit before the quarterly comes out. But anyway.
You're right, Jim.
That's right. Quarterly. So look forward to the quarterly numbers, as they will be a lot of charts outside the 5-year range, which gets me excited. So talk to you then, Dr. Foreman.
Love talking with you both. Thanks. Take care.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Foreman, for coming on once again. It was good to have him on. Ellen, any thoughts from his comments? First off, I love that I was pointing out the 5-year chart deal a few months ago when it was just outside the number, and now it's like way outside the number. So forevermore, I can say, for the next 5 years at least, I can say, hey, those 5-year charts look a little wonky.
Oh, yeah.
It does show you though, to get it for the listener's perspective, trying to figure out, what has the impact been. Some of those charts are just crazy, just how far outside the 5-year range they really are.
Oh, yeah. It makes you have to reassess. Yeah. Maybe we shouldn't be using the 5-year range. Maybe
the 5-year range.
The 10-year or the 15-year range.
That would be interesting. How would it compare to 15? Well, for one, you'd have to use the 35-year range because it goes back to 1985. So one of the things, though, I thought about 25, 26, 27%. We'll call it 30%. Let's just say that we calculate that oil demand was down 30% during this time period. Can we reasonably assume, let's just say the January or the 2019 demand numbers, can we reasonably assume that moving forward, we understand what the bottom of the oil market actually is until, sometime in the future when we reevaluate? But for the next couple of years, we understand that 30% drop, we'll say, from 2019 is as low as we can actually go in oil demand.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, we could come up with all sorts of crazy things, we have, there are all sorts of crazy things you can come up with. And I think people are more likely now to think that these so-called black swan events are not so black swanny. But yeah, I mean, 30% drop in demand is massive. And probably probably the worst we could see. I mean, I'd say crude oil trading negative contracts is probably the bottom of the market.
Right. But I mean, I'm just saying, if we go below 30%, what you're talking about then is like the Black Plague has hit, and there's just, to get below 30% is not even, I don't say, obviously you take like the Black Plague or something crazy, but even if you had another coronavirus 2 outbreak, we understand that there's a certain level of society that has to operate just so we can eat and keep the power on and stuff like that. And it seems like a 30% drop from 2019 numbers is kind of as low as that can go.
Is it my favorite misinterpretation of history in comparing the Black Plague to coronavirus? When someone was like, well, after the Black Plague, the cost of labor went up. So that means, why aren't wages going up? The cost of labor went up because a lot of people died and they were having trouble finding people to work. Now, not a lot of people didn't die, and most of the people who died weren't actually working.
Okay. Yes.
So that's why you're not going to see wages go up.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
It's kind of like, maybe that was like an economist comment, and they just needed a historian to remind them that what the Black Plague actually was and what it actually did. I mean, if you look at a population graph from Europe, there's a serious dip during particularly bad these were entire towns were completely wiped out. That's not what we're seeing here.
Well, and the New York Times, kudos to them. They finally reported some good statistics, some accurate statistics about what's going on, which they said they released this weekend. A third of all U.S. deaths come from nursing homes.
Yeah.
And it's and I'm not picking on nursing homes or folks that are in nursing homes, but that's not a surprising statistic, actually. No. It's kind of old news. And
I wouldn't be surprised to hear that most deaths in the more deaths in the United States come from nursing homes than come from schools.
Well, if you go look at the, I'll pull the article up right here. If you go look at the piece, it says that in several states, we'll link to this in the show notes if you have a New York Times subscription. But it says that so if you look at the share of death by states, so in Minnesota, 80%. This is from nursing homes. West Virginia, 80%. Rhode Island, 73%. Pennsylvania, 66%. Delaware, 61%. Massachusetts, 59%. You got to go, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more states down before you drop below 50%. And so the nursing homes are obviously having a tremendous impact. Now, West Virginia, you only had 43 deaths. So it's not like it's a substantial number. But, and then in Europe, I think they estimate 50% of all deaths come from nursing homes / long-term care facilities. So you are correct in your assessment that the demand for labor is not going away for the most part. And so, anyways,
history matters, especially when you're talking about old news.
History matters and statistics matter.
Yes.
Just simple. So
anyway,
where will you be this week, Ms. Wald?
I will be on the Hill.
The Hill.
The actual Hill, the internet Hill, with an op-ed about the future of oil industry, oil production, oil markets, things like that. I will be on investing.com and also Forbes with some updates about Aramco's Q1 financials. I will also be on Bloomberg News on Tuesday, I think a little afternoon, I think 12:40, to discuss what's going on in Saudi Arabia. So, and that's a joint Bloomberg and Bloomberg BNN Canada broadcast. So check that out.
Okay. All right. Well, we will be back next week. We do have a scheduling conflict, so the podcast will come out on Wednesday instead of Tuesday. So if we're a day late, just expect that. And then after that, we'll be back to no. We do have a couple program notes. We will be off for Memorial Day. So is that, yeah. So we'll be back. We'll be a week. We'll be a day late next week, and then we'll be a week off a week and be back June 1st, getting ready for the OPEC showdown.
Oh, it's going to be fun. Or maybe not if it's virtual.
Well, real quick. Aramco announces that they're going to make a cut. Will that or will that not be counted into the official OPEC number in June?
Okay, so, that definitely muddies the water.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. They're like, oh, well, we already cut that. So, yeah.
Yeah, so something to track over the next few weeks.
The posturing has begun.
Okay, listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. Dr. Foreman for coming on, and we will be back next time.